I'll tell you, I'm here in so since I think the majority of the people have joined, so welcome to our somewhat unique class of ROSH-ESTHER in the sense that we're all on Zoom. This kind of brings back memories, to, at least for me, from good old COVID times, right? When we'd meet on Zoom. And I appreciate everyone who's joining us today. If we want to remind ourselves of Zoom etiquette, since today we're really tuned into the screen, if it's possible to be with your name and with your camera on so that we all feel that we're all in the room and we know who we are, so then feel free to do that. If for some reason you are, having a messy dinner and you don't want to disturb us with your camera, then we won't judge you. But if you can, so that we all see our faces and feel like we're participating, then please welcome to do so. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. Just a quick update. I was invited kind of last moment to join um, Council of Churches. New York State Council of Churches is organizing I'm not sure if it's just in New York. I'll find out tomorrow if it's just the New York Council of Churches or if it's more of a national one because it's happening in D.C. And I met the head of the New York Council of Churches in an interfaith event that took place in Rochester in December. And we started to talk, and then we had another Zoom last week, and he said, I don't have a lot of time to talk with you because I'm busy with my mother, but can you please come to Washington, D.C. next week to participate in a conference, in a panel in a conference at a conference. Um, the topic of the conference is not unrelated to all the political turmoil that we're experiencing. It's about countering religious nationalism. And Then when we had the preparatory talk at the panel, the other two people who are academics that I'm going to be, one is from Brandeis, the other one I forget which university is from. The panel that I was kind of added to last minute as I guess a representative of the Jews, so to speak, and also someone who came from Israel. I realized that by the mere fact that there's a Jew and someone who's related to Israel, that's everything becomes extremely tense and everybody's very afraid that whatever it is we're going to say, somebody's going to get offended. So everybody is being very careful and cautious because we live in those kind of precarious times. So hence started my little adventure here in Washington, D.C. And that's why I'm teaching from the hotel room in DC. And today I walked together with my son, who's accompanying me in our nation's capital, and visited all the monuments and made sure they're still in their places and intact. And in fact, they are. So hopefully there'll be um, successful conference tomorrow. And this to me is important because as I was committed to this in Israel, so after moving here, I'm still very committed to interfaith dialogue. And there's in our tradition, in our teachings, there's time for kind of like what we came here to do this evening, which is the inner study of our own traditions and our own spirituality and our own um, kind of like evolvement and evolution as human beings, as our souls are here in this world, as individuals, as our community, in our within our own Jewish tradition. But it's just like breath. It goes, you inhale and you exhale, just like in the meditation that we're going to do shortly. In the end, Jewish spirituality is not just about an individual growing. We're always part of a community. We're always part of society at large. And hopefully the inner journeys that we take and the inner motions that we can, experience and even the spiritual language that we can learn from our ancestors as we're trying to do as we study Kabbalah, it has to also in the end, kind of like be in communication with the outside world. So when, you know, a reverend invites a rabbi to be a guest at a conference, you go, and you try to be a constructive partner and kind of trying to figure out who we are and what are the kind of like what are the challenges that we all have as people who, have we come from religious traditions, and we also live in a state, in a country, in a republic that kind of sanctifies the separation of church and state, right? And understanding that there has to be a way for all of those traditions to coexist, but then there's also, there's a place for the spirit and a place for reason, etc. And I think that the interesting thing that will be addressed in this conference is that it's not just an American question, it's kind of a global question. We see it in many countries around the world. We see it in Israel for sure, in India and other areas. So these are kind of like the paths that we all, are traveling and wandering through. Both some of those are internal and spiritual and psychological, and some of them are external, and they have to do with our community at large and with our society and with our country, but actually with human society. It also so happened that on Sunday, both Rabbi Katz and I have participated in an event in Pittsford at a church, at the United Church of Pittsford, which was a belated Martin Luther King um, celebration service, which was very beautiful with music and many people coming together, lay leaders, lay people, many clergy of different faiths, the supervisor of both Pittsford and Brighton, etc. And everything was wonderful, except that the keynote speaker, a certain reverend, made a speech that both Rabbi Katz and myself and some other of our congregates who were present felt was anti-Semitic in a sense, because of one comment that that person made in which he equated racism and sexism and Zionism as the three greatest evils in nowadays society. And we actually, but there was, but once again, this was so it was kind of shocking to us when it happened, and we did confront the person, and he apologized, and then Rabbi Katz and I wrote him a letter, and he responded today with a written apology. So in other words, what I want to say is that how important it is to be engaged in these dialogues, and that to understand that we are here to grow together as a community, and that yes, people can sometimes say something that we struggle with. Sometimes we can disagree, but if we listen and if we kind of like engage in listening to one another, hopefully these kind of incidents are things that we can all grow from. So on a positive note, I want to say that something that was very disturbing, since we wrote a very, kind of like direct but polite letter, and we show that we don't seek to fight or to become enemies. We'll stand for our people, but we will not. We're not here to make enemies with one another. I think it was well responded. So just sharing that with you as well, so you'll know that these things are happening, and that we're not just studying Kabbalah all day. In other words. Yeah, but nonetheless, it's important that we can also dedicate some time to study our own spiritual tradition. So it all kind of is coming together in a beautiful and difficult way, I guess, which is not unrelated to the topic of our conversation. So maybe now, after this kind of like a geopolitical introduction of mine, we will go back to our, oh, and I see that people are still joining in, which is beautiful. I'm very glad that so many people have agreed to join, even though we're not meeting in person. Um, Let me see. So how do you make this larger? Minimize. Okay. Are you people seeing the lyrics of the song now, by any chance? You are? You seeing it in fullness?
Yes.
You're seeing it in
Yes.
full? Okay, very good. So I don't have a guitar here with me in DC, so you'll have to forgive me. Anyways, I'm not so sure how the guitar would come out in the Zoom, so I'll just sing it And please feel welcome to join me if maybe you've already learning the song. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם אדוני, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל יתן למוט רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא יישן, שומר ישראל. אדוני שומרך, אדוני צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה, וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך, מעתה ועד עולם. מעתה ועד עולם. So thank you for being here with me as I was singing this song, to remind ourselves that this is the Psalm 121, which has been kind of part of the textual biblical mosaic of the mystical Zoharic text that we've been reading together. So the building blocks of the Kabbalistic text are more often than not some biblical scripture, right? And this psalm, I'm reminding us, according to the early Midrash, was sung by Jacob as he was wandering and traveling from Beersheba to Haran before he had his famous dream about the ladder. And by looking at the mountains, looking outside to the world and looking inwards into himself, to his horim, to his parents who weren't there, he realized that there is, in fact, a special pathway within his own soul called Jacob's ladder. And we've been studying in the past few weeks one of the Kabbalistic interpretations to what is this Jacob's ladder. And what we've learned is that it's actually, to the Kabbalists, this is actually a journey that is from the Ein, from nothingness, into Ani, into becoming a self. So according to this mystical or spiritual understanding, which is shared by Jews, by other religions as well, by some philosophies that come from the Far East as well, the self is created each and every moment from nothingness or emptiness or from the divine. And in Hebrew, it reflects with the fact that the word ein, emptiness or nothingness, and the word ani are the same three letters, Aleph, Yud, Nun, and we saw how the Kabbalistic text kind of builds upon that. So maybe now we can turn to our meditation. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we're all sitting comfortably, whichever place it is that we're in our homes or wherever it is that we're watching this class from. I invite us to sit comfortably in a conscious and aware way, which usually means that we will want to feel our feet grounded, connected to the earth, to the ground. We would want to be sitting as straight as we can. So if we're leaning forward or backwards or sideways, we want to try to center our body to the best of our capability in this very moment. And we want to sit in a straight yet comfortable way. And we can notice how our legs are touching the ground, our feet. And we can notice our body leaning against a chair or a sofa. And we can notice our arms, our hands, and see, are they resting now on our knees maybe, or maybe on a desk table? And we can gently close our eyes, as it sometimes helps us to tune inwards. And we can connect to our breath, realizing that we're breathing all the time. And as we are aware of the inhale motion and the exhale motion of air that passes from our nostrils and mouth all the way to our lungs, and then the other way. Let's just use this time to scan our body from toes to the top of our heads and everything that's in between. Let us be aware of any sensations that we have in our body. Perhaps we're feeling some kind of a tense muscle. Maybe we have some kind of an unpleasant feeling in one part of our body. Maybe we have a pleasant feeling in some part of our body. With each breath, we become more aware of the sensations in our body. Sometimes we can direct our breath and focus it. It's kind of like to relax a tense place. And likewise, we can also turn our attention to our emotional self. Sometimes we refer to it as our heart. And kind of ask ourselves gently as we breathe consciously, hey, how are you feeling today? How's the day been? What kind of pleasant or unpleasant emotions, encounters, feelings we've had today? Kind of see what comes to mind when we focus on our emotional self. And in a similar way, we can turn our consciousness and awareness to our thinking brain, to our thinking mind, and tune to examine the river of thoughts that always flows through our minds and consciousness. When we meditate, we realize that thoughts tend to come and engage our mind and our attention. We quite often get taken by a train of thought. So we just view whatever comes, observe. And as we breathe and focus on our breath, we just let those thoughts pass one by one. And we can see how our physical sensations, our emotions, our feel and feelings, how our thought processes all combined in some kind of a miraculous mosaic that we identify with as ourself, as the ani, the I. And then, as much as possible, let us try to observe the observer. Who is it that is observing all these physical sensations, emotions, thoughts, desires? In tuning inward and observing the observer, the Kabbalists say lies a secret of the ani, the I, the self that comes from ayin, from divine emptiness, as we've been learning. So let's just be with this notion for a few more breaths. And from this place, it is that as aware and conscious and unified and tranquil, it, as to our best capacity in this very moment, I invite all of us to say the Shema together. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And then I invite us all to say the blessing for studying Torah together. Let us make a prayer and a wish and an intent that our coming together via Zoom to study in this on this Wednesday evening will be for the well-being and for the benefit of our own journeys throughout this life, the lives of our dear ones, people whom we know and care for, and even for people that we don't know, but we want them to benefit from this in some way that maybe we can't understand. Let us say the blessing together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we've been studying this text for quite a while, and it's kind of you can go with those texts. You can go faster or slower. I kind of still feel like we can benefit from being with that text for a little bit longer and kind of letting it sit with us so that we can really make sure that it's a very rich text. We can make sure that we understand on more levels. Um, and uh, last time we started to understand that beneath all these metaphors and associations and calligraphies and drawing with letters and midrash and interpretations of scripture, there's also a Kabbalistic system, a slightly more systematic thinking, which is actually the Kabbalistic tree of life, that is always the undertone, or not always, but quite often is the undertone of these Kabbalistic texts. So I wanted to show you two things today. I wanted to share with you the text one more time, and I wanted to also show you a diagram of the tree of life that kind of corresponds with this text. All right, so if I just want to read the text through, we've been reading it for about a month, but let's just read it through. I also want to say that someone asked me, hey, can we get a copy of this text so that we can read it at home between the classes? And I said, it's on the website. So any of you who wishes to read the text, or the future texts that we'll be studying together, we try to put it on the website. And in fact, when you go to to the Temple Sinai website and you go into Adult Ed and then go into ROSH-ESTHER, the same place where you can find the link to this class, if you scroll down, you find a PDF, a link to a PDF of this text. So you can read it before the class, after the class, during the class, and between the class. All right. So just so you know that this text is available to you. And so will other texts be in the future. Okay. All right. So Jacob departed from Beersheba and went to Haran. That's a verse from Genesis. And then there's a call, mortals, celestial, beloved, elite potentates, draw near and listen. Who among you who are wise, masters of eyes of discernment, let them come and learn. So this is kind of like an invitation for us to be wise and look with our inner eyes and learn and observe this vision that some Kabbalist from about 800 years ago or 900 years ago is sharing with us. When the whitehead lifts up three letters and engraves them in chiseled gravings, Aleph, Yud, and Nun, Ayin, nothing is hewn. Aleph, supreme head, concealed of all concealed. Yud, ascendant in will, completed by head above, descended below, emerging and emitting 32 paths, until they were engraved amid precious gleaming gems, tied to the letter Nun, male and female. Two lovers, powerful nexus consummated between them, holy name bonded within them. From them originates food for all, and worlds are completed. Of this, extended Nun is engraved, principle of two, bent Nun, female alone. So this was the previous paragraph that we read. I will not um, dwell too long on it because we've talked about it, but it helps to read it again and understanding that this is basically a heavily coded and poetic way to describe how the ani, the self, is being created from ayin, and how each letter, each of the three letters of ayin, of nothingness, of emptiness, of divine emptiness, is portraying a different nuance or a different stage of formation of that nothingness. So again, Aleph being the first letter of the alphabet, representing the letter one coming before the bet of Bereshit, of Genesis, of the duality of creation, would be the bright or the white head, the infinite light, the unimaginable, undescribable, eternal emanation of God, also known as the first Sephirah, the first emanation of Keter. Yud being the point of origin of thought and consciousness that also withholds within itself the 32 paths, which are the 22 letters of the alphabet, or the 10 digits. It could be digit, or the 10 Sephirot, the 10 emanations. In other words, all of computations and language and thought is encapsulated in that Yud. And then Nun, which has a imagery of the straight and the bent Nun. In other words, the male and the female energies, kind of representing the creation of the physical world, of the material world, and everything that has a body or bodies, everything that is created physically. And these three letters also represent the three highest Sefirot, Keter, Chochmah, and Binah, in the Kabbalistic tree of life. We're going to talk a little bit more of that very soon, a little later in our in our class today. Then the two other paragraphs which we've been reading. Can you all see the writing? Okay. Yud, will, emanates paths, striking between letters, forming the firmament of Jacob between two spirits, infusing speech amid the limbs, ultimately cascading to that Nun who is bent, north and south bonded with her as one, afterward linking together as one. Bent Nun is called Be'er Sheva. This is also how we start to connect back to the original verse from Genesis about Jacob traveling from Beersheba to Haran, suffused from Jacob to water all the flocks of sheep. Of this, Jacob departed from Beersheba and went to Haran. Alternatively, from Beersheba above, for he emerges from her. Afterward, he descends to Haran, lower well, flaring Haron, wrath of Yahweh, the sword of Yahweh, court of Yahweh, which are all depictions of the emanation of din, of judgment, of harsh judgment. Of this, God, nations have come into your estate. Psalm 79:1. So maybe what I want to do now is I'm going to try to share with you a diagram of the tree of life, if I'll be able to do so. Let me see how we can do that. Find the Zoom if I'm able. Not so easy somehow. Oh, here you are. Here you all are. Where is that? It's not showing. Okay. It doesn't want to share that screen. How do I do it? Well, I can't seem to be doing that very well. Should be able to see it. What are you seeing now? Are you seeing
Yeah.
Tree of Life? Are you seeing?
Yes, I think so. It's in color
Yeah, you see it?
with colored lines. Yes.
Yes, you see it? You see
Yes,
the
it's just
diagram with, okay, so interesting enough, it's very fascinating because right now I can't see it, but you can, which is very exciting, at least to the point that I can Yeah, I see it too. You see it now? You see that? Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So interestingly enough, um, do you see all of it? Also the one at the bottom? You see it all now?
yeah,
Now we see all of it.
All right.
Or anyway, I
Kind of
do.
trying to use this diagram to connect all this together. So you see, for the Kabbalists, Jacob's ladder, not surprisingly, could be interpreted as this tree of life. Because the tree of life, or these 10 emanations of God, kind of have a description of how, from the very abstract and infinite bright light of divinity, on the one end, which right here could be maybe described by this top circle called Keter. How is this connected and related to the bottom one, which is at the bottom, called Malchut, which is basically this material world in which we live in the here and now? What is the connection, in other words, between the divine or the infinite or the ultimate divine and the very normal, day-to-day, physical, mundane reality in which we live? Now, you know that that is a question that not only the Kabbalists were intrigued by, other people who were intrigued by it, for example, were the Jewish medieval philosophers, right? And not just them. If you ever learn about Maimonides or other Jewish philosophers, or Christian thinkers, or Muslim thinkers, or other cultures, we're saying, what is the nature of the connection between the human and the divine, between the physical, material world and the divine realms? And for the Kabbalists, it was very important to maintain that there is, in fact, a relationship and a connection, and in fact, that everything is divine. The physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the spiritual, everything is divine. And by the way, good and evil, they're also divine. Um, Everything comes from one source in monotheism. And so the Kabbalists thought of this tree of life, and in this case, they're also thinking of the tree of that, metaphor of Jacob's ladder that has different rungs, connecting heaven and earth. And they said, when Jacob was having a dream and he saw these rungs and this ladder and the angels coming up and down, this is similar to the tree of life. And in the tree of life, something that we spoke about a little bit last week, there's much, much, much to learn about it, and we can't learn all about all of it in one class, or even in one semester, or even in one lifetime. One of the kind of ways to think about the tree of life is that the three highest sefirot, the three highest emanations that here are depicted by a white, a gray, and a black circle on the top, are just like the three letters that we've been learning about: Aleph, Yud, and Nun. So the bright light, the highest Sefira Keter, which is that we've been learning about, which is just ra radiance, no duality, just light, unattainable by thought or by human description, would be Keter. And the second one, Chokhmah, which is here depicted by this gray circle, would be the letter Yud. It's the first emanation. It's that little dot. It's like the big bang of consciousness that comes out of Keter. The first one is divine. The second one is equally divine, and so is the third one, Binah, which is the beginning of creation of the physical world, although in a very kind of a raw form. Also, Binah, which here would be the letter Nun, and in our text. And out of those three emanates the seven lower Sefirot that are here depicted in a colorful way, a little bit like the color of the seven colors of the rainbow. And the Kabbalistic belief is that every human soul, every human being has those seven lower sefirot somewhere manifested within each and every soul. The lowest one, Malchut, also known as Shekhinah, is actually being the physical body or the physical world, because Shekhinah means to dwell, where God dwells within this very physical material world. And everything in between is basically the mental, emotional, spiritual self that we experience when we tune in. Relevant to our text is that the Kabbalists, when they talk about the central Sephirah that you see here in the middle, really in the middle of this of the tree of life, you see a Sephirah that here is kind of like depicted in golden color. It's also number 6 is called Tiferet, and they usually refer to that Sephirah as Jacob. So our text, now we understand when Jacob is wandering from one place to another, one way to understand it is actually is the self of each and every person that is also traveling and journeying from the more abstract, infinite realms of divinity that are at the top of the tree of life, or for the Kabbalist, as you go up in the tree of life, you also go within into one's soul, into the more spiritual and um, deep realms of our psyche and our being, and then basically journeying back and forth from those very abstract realms down into the physical everyday reality that is depicted by the lower parts of the tree of life and everything that is between. So the journey of Jacob from Beer Sheva to Haran is understood as the journeys that our soul is making from Ain to Ani in each and every moment. And then, if we go back to our text, and then I'll probably want to open it for some text for some questions and discussions, but I have to be able to find the text again and share it with you. Not an easy task on my laptop. It's been a long time since COVID, and I was kind of like an expert on those kind of things. I'm no longer an expert. Let me see. Here it is. You see it, right? You see the text again. But then again, I don't see it. Very funny. Maybe it's a secret agent of the CIA or the Mossad here playing with me as I'm in the middle of DC. So here we go. How do I make this so that I can see it too? Let me see. Yeah, okay, here we go. All right, so it's interestingly enough, the text that we're reading has giving us, the key way to understand, the key word to understand this text is that it says alternatively at the beginning of the second paragraph. There are two ways to understand Be'er Sheva. Be'er, as we spoke about it last week. Be'er is a well, like a well that brings water. One of the symbol of Sefirat Binah, of those higher three realms, are a well, because it's like if you go, it's like you look deep inside yourself. There's a deep well from which water emanates. And that water kind of gives life to all of the fields around it, which is our soul and our lives. And Joseph, he would travel, we said, from his mother to his wife to be, from Rebecca to Rachel. And when he came to Haran, there was also a well. So in this way, our soul is constantly traveling and journeying, or our self is constantly traveling from the divine well, which is within, the divine spark, into the divine, into the well of of um, of the external world, which is around us. And then one more sentence I will say to bring it together: Be'er Sheva, a place of abundance, also the well of seven, the seven lower Sefirot, but also a place of abundance, of a place of lack. As the soul journeys from the divine into the world, and maybe vice versa, we would sometimes feel abundance, such as in good times or in times when we feel fulfilled or in times when there's good things happening, etc., which will be depicted by the Kabbalists as Be'er Sheva, as a place of abundance. And sometimes there would be Haran, there would be lack, there would be conflict, there would be anguish, there would be fierce judgment, din, as they say. And those would be depicted as the right and the left sides of the tree of life. And the Kabbalists are teaching us to understand that all these experiences are actually from the same source, from the same divine source, in a way that we can't understand. And maybe that can explain the sentence that we saw previously, and we kind of said at the very last moment of our last class, why are they talking at the end of this teaching? Why are they bringing Psalm 79? God, nations have come into your estate. And we said this is exactly it. Originally, the verse that concludes this teaching is kind of an oy vey verse. Oh no, the goyim have come to town. The the nations have come into your estate, into Jerusalem, into Israel, and desecrated it and destroyed it and put it into exile. And now the Jewish people are suffering, and we're under the rule of all those nations. Again, this is a text written in the Middle Ages. But they kind of like say, but we can also read the verse in an opposite way. Oh, how wonderful it is that nations have come into your estate and that the estate of God is expanding. It used to be only the Jews who believed in this God. Now, other nations, also Christians, speaking of this, of Washington, D.C., speaking of all these current events, now many nations share the estate of God. So what had seemed to be Haran, had seemed to be a place of destruction and oppression and occupation and conflict for the Jewish people, if you have the eyes of the mystic to see it, you see that sometimes something that looks like a bad thing, like a Haran, is also a good thing because the kingdom of God is expanding. So it's kind of like all in the eye of the beholder, and you need to have the eyes to see it. Okay, so goes the summary of this kind of like convoluted and condensed Kabbalistic thesis. I'm happy now to hear. I'm going to now actually stop sharing so we can see everybody, and I'm going to be happy to open it for questions, for comments, for discussion. Who would like to go first? Please raise your hand or okay, Eric.
Why did they write like this?
It's a great question. It's a
It,
great Yeah, you want to say something more about it, or is that a short question, Eric?
yeah,
What do you find intriguing or challenging about this, or beautiful about this way of writing?
well, very challenging. I know that. Okay, I can't. Beth, could you blank?
I don't know why are we hearing you is are there more than one computers open in your house?
I think so.
So that becomes a Kabbalistic challenge to us because so your question is why did they write like this, right? It's a very important question. So it's very interesting because other Kabbalistic writings that are not the Zohar, they are written in a more straightforward way. There are Kabbalistic texts, even from the same period, and maybe possibly even that were written by the same people, the same anonymous people that we don't know who they were, that are not the Zohar, and they try to be a little more straightforward. They kind of like describe in a more matter-of-fact, straightforward way the tree of life and their understanding of the world. Interestingly enough, these texts that are more straightforward did not reach the same level of cultural importance of the Zohar. Because the Zohar is written in such an enigmatic, riddle, Zen-like way, okay, it has become a very, very popular and important and central book of Judaism. And I think that the reason, maybe some of you can attest to that, I think that the reason why these texts kind of shine throughout the centuries as a very important text is because these are a kind of text that kind of force the reader to be a very active reader. It's like you're trying to, maybe it's like in some ways, it's like when you're analyzing poetry. In other ways, it's when you're trying to kind of like decode a detective kind of like riddle, or a mystery, to kind of like unravel a mystery. Because these texts were, and another thing is possibly because when they were trying to describe very deep visions that they had, okay, that they maybe couldn't portray in a very straightforward way. So when we are reading these texts, um, the language of the Zohar and the style of the Zohar, and maybe some of you have experienced this. If you've survived all these classes and you've been to so many ROSH-ESTHER classes, maybe you already noticed that reading those texts are kind of like a meditation on their own. It's not just an intellectual endeavor. It goes beyond that. It kind of is supposed to kind of awaken the soul into a different state of being. It awakens the soul to look at itself in a certain way, and it kind of also gives us a common spiritual language, or a common language to describe inner constructs or inner relationships that we have within ourselves, and realms and rungs and levels that sometimes it's hard for us to describe them and to talk to them with one another because we don't have the vocabulary for it. So these texts, they're trying to awaken us to the possibility of these kind of realms of reality existing within us and in this world. So that's why, maybe that answers a little bit, Eric, why they wrote this way. Right? It's a little bit like asking why does a rock ballad have, sound like a rock ballad, and why does an amazing, you know, Picasso painting drawn like this? It's very artistic, right? And it's supposed to kind of be provoking and invoking and awakening. So that's why they wrote like this. All right, more questions or comments or complaints or suggestions for improvement.
Rabbi, can
Yeah.
you?
Yes, I can see you there. Ralph and
Lona.
Lona. Mhm.
I was glad to see the wells. I'm glad to see that the well is so central to talking about your inner life, because I love the stories of what happens at the wells. It's where the couples are made. And you got me going last week, and I looked up, and yes, Moses meets Zipporah at the well. She isn't named. There are 7 daughters of the Midian of Jethro. So it's another well story, which surprised me because I don't think about that one so much. But
Go ahead.
well is life-giving. And if the symbol of having the well inside you, and that it's something you can access at any time, I like that.
Well, thank you for your comment. I think it's very rich. First of all, I didn't remember that Zipporah was one of 7 sisters, and it's very interesting because it kind of like it's interesting when you read biblical text through a Kabbalistic prism. You're always surprised and how much it's like, oh, how could I not have seen this before? Right? So here we have yet another love story by the well, and here even the number 7, like Be'er Sheva, resonates again, right? And it's interesting because, by the way, it's not for this particular class, but there is a very um, deep spiritual connection between Jacob and Moses, of both being depictions of this same Sefirat Tiferet.
Mm.
Sometimes Moses is considered the hero of the journey of the self, and sometimes Jacob is. It's just different levels and different ways to think about it. You can think about why Jacob and Moses were chosen to represent like the self, like the hero of the journey of the self, archetypically speaking, right? And so that's very fascinating what you just said. And the well, another comment is you know that you said, the well is where the love stories happen in the Bible, and that kind of connects to the love story that in our text is about the noon and the noon, right? The straight noon representing the male, and the female bent noon representing the female, kind of like the round shaped and the straight shaped, kind of yin and yang. Is kind of like that would be kind of like depicted as the high divine love story, the female and the male, you know, energies of the divine that are basically resonate in every human love story, or maybe not just even human, every love story that is in nature, whether it's Jacob and Rachel, or Moses and Zipporah, or two birds on a tree top, that miracle that creates life, right? And another thing about again about that symbol of the well, and in another semester, or another time, I could bring you, and maybe I will, Zoharic Kabbalistic texts that expand upon this metaphor of the well, right? And for them, it was a very important symbol to that kind of like divinity within, because what's beautiful about that metaphor is you can approach the well, you can look deep inside, like we can go and look deep inside ourselves when we meditate, but you can't see the source, right? You can't see the bottom, just like you can't see maybe that divine source, yet it's there because, hey, water comes out, right? You can bring down a bucket of water, right? And you know that there will be water coming out, and that water sustains life, just like we can look deep down into our own souls, into that place where, there's no longer with words and concepts and ideas and understanding. It's like kind of like a deep, the depth of our soul. And, but we know it's not just a dark abyss. There's water, there's divinity, there's energy you can sustain yourself. And I also loved what you said, Lona, about the fact that it's always available to us. I think that resonates very well with the biblical story of Jacob and what we've learned from what we've been talking about, Esainai Haharim Hahorim, because right, Jacob had the dream according to the Midrash that we learned in, I think, lesson 1 or 2 of the semester. The reason why he actually discovered the rungs and the ladder is because he had nothing and he was alone, right? And he was not he did not have, his dad's credit card in his wallet. He did not have, a family. He did not have any possessions. So therefore, even when you have nothing, you still have yourself. And in yourself, you can tune in and find that well, right? And this is kind of like the Kabbalistic um, promise. And when we pray and when we meditate and when we practice our spiritual stamina, this is one way to look at it, is we practice having a connection to that well, right? So that's kind of like okay, here's Denise. Yes, Denise, how are you? It's good to see you.
Okay, it's Denise.
Mhm.
So one of my Kabbalah teachers talk about Jacob saying in Genesis 28, she says, Jacob said, God is in this place. I did not know it. So God is everywhere in good and evil, everything. So does that have anything to do with what we're studying? God is in this place. I did not know that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. God is in this place, every place, right? And I did not know it. So right, because the discovery of Jacob's ladder right? The discovery was that there is a ladder, right? So what happened to Jacob is not that his life problems were solved and resolved in that moment. And I think I mentioned it in one of the previous classes. Before the revelation, before the dream, Jacob's life was a mess. Yeah. After that, his life was even a greater mess, right? He had a very disturbed life with all these conspiracies of the two sisters and the father-in-law and the business that they did, and then the escaping and coming back, and even until the very end of his days, with Joseph being sold and all those tragedies and all those hardships, right? It's not about, my life become, I have the revelation, I become enlightened, my life becomes all roses and, and butterflies and perfect and rainbows. It's not about that, right? It's about having another realm or another dimension of human experience that is a relationship with the divine, right? Which maybe gives meaning to things, or maybe helps you see things in a different way. It doesn't mean that there's no problems, right? What Jacob, that realization that Jacob has, and then he calls a place Beth El, the house of God. Like half the conservative congregations in the world are named after that moment, right? And there's actually a village in the West Bank or where everyone now there's like, are we allowed to call the West Bank anymore? It's like the Gulf of Mexico has become the Gulf of America now. Whatever. All, but there is an actual place called Beth El, okay? And but we would say it's not about that particular place. It's about every place, like you said, right? Every place and every moment in life is an invitation for the ladder to make itself available for us and to reach from that well. And it can be very challenging when things are great, and then our tendency would be to kind of like attribute it to ourselves or to, you know, and it could be even no less and even more challenging where challenging things happen to us, and then like, hey, how can this be also divine? Right? Which I think is why one reason why the Kabbalists brought the last quotation from Psalms, like, oh, that worst thing that happened to us, that we were in the exile and the nations have come and desecrated our land. We're gonna twist that verse, and turn it upside down to say, oh, it's actually a good thing that the nations have come into your land. It's that kind of mystical way that tries to see that in every calamity there's also growth, and in every growth there's also a calamity. Right?
And God is in everything.
Yes, which is basically the root and the essence of monotheism. But it can be very hard. It can be very hard. Like think about the worst atrocities, October 7th, whatever. Where was God, right? So a very serious monotheistic approach, which is also the Kabbalistic approach, even though they talk about God being 10, they actually talk about it being all one, right? They'll say, yeah, you have to learn to look and see that there is divine presence even in the worst places, right? And yes, human are evil, and there's a lack of that, and there's all sorts of things, but that's kind of like the spiritual work that they're talking about.
The thing is, we forget. We have to be reminded. It's like this journey from forgetting and remembering, forgetting and remembering that God is in this place, and we forget, and then we remember.
Right, and I think it's also a choice because and to say it in another way, if we were really aware, I think it's really almost impossible to be in high God alert all the time.
Yeah.
Right? If we really felt divinity in its full richness and potency in every moment of our life, I think it's very hard. You can go crazy. You know what I mean? So I think that we mask it. We kind of like we dilute it. We're reminded of it when we are ready. I think when our soul is ready, right? And when we are, or when we make a conscious effort and practice, we can become more aware, right? But it doesn't mean that we have to become those kind of like highly spiritually people who are all the time get everybody else annoyed because they're more they make it sure that everybody know that they're more aware. You see what I mean? It's like it's also okay to just live your life normally and be chill, right? But then also have that nonetheless also develop that inner relationship with the divine. So just like Jacob's ladder, we go up and down, up and down. We can't be at the high rungs all the time. It'll drive us mad. But yes, we have to constantly be reminded. Yes, the people there who are politely raising their hand. It starts with
No,
a
I was
yeah.
thinking the exact same thing, the analogy of the ladder. Our natural state is this low state. I think it's very difficult to, elevate, and get up to a high spiritual level. And it's fleeting. It's like little moments. But it's hard. It's not just hard, it's impossible, I think, to stay there. But there's glimpses where we get there and there's understanding. But then naturally, as humans, we gravitate and get pulled to this lower state.
Yeah, there's in the book of Yetzirah, the book of creation that we've already mentioned here, because when the book of Zohar is talking about the 32 paths, they're kind of quoting Sefer Yetzirah, which is a more ancient Kabbalistic book than the Zohar. One of the ways that they describe, the divine revelation is like you said, the glimpse. It's say Ratzov Vashov. They say it's like lightning. It's the light of God. You see it like in a moment. It's here and it comes and it goes. It's here. It's here one moment. It's gone the next, and then you have to like refine it again and again, right? Um, I think that the interesting thing about that is that we kind of like if we kind of like imagine that it opens another dimension to view our life, because if you think about algebra for a moment, right? If we have like if we journey our life like Jacob's life of on an axis going from x from right to left or from left to right, right? Then the Joseph ladder says, but there's actually also the y-axis. You know what I mean? There's another dimension that opens, and it actually doesn't matter if what's happening to us now is pleasant or non-pleasant, good or bad, positive or negative, healthy or sick. You know what I mean? There's those judgments are on the x-axis, right? The Jacob's ladder kind of like when we are reminded of that other axis, it's not necessarily about our physical well-being or where we are in the physical world, young, old, happy, sad, rich, poor, whatever, right? It's actually about our soul's connection to its source and the meaning that we can make out of it. So that's kind of like the revelation of that. Anybody else? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I've struggled with the text in part because it feels so mysterious and hard to understand. As I was reading it, I was wondering what it would be like if I was a Kabbalist and I was in a Hamas tunnel as a hostage, or I was right in the midst of a fire in Los Angeles, or if I had metastatic cancer that was, tearing me apart, and wondering, how this text could help me cope with this. And I oscillate back and forth as thinking, well, this is really profound and not easy and difficult. And on the other hand, thinking this text is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. So I'd welcome your thoughts about that because it's a struggle for me.
Right. So I know, different people can judge different Jewish texts, and I also, not every text is for everybody. And by the way, there are many, even within the Zohar literature, there's many different kinds of texts, and it was actually written by many different authors, and maybe, people connect to this one or that one. And by the way, that feeling that I can share that throughout my life, I've struggled with many Zoharic texts. And I've often felt, oh, what is this text? It's not saying anything. It's ridiculous. It's like, but then every time at least for me, and this is very subjective, and I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just really honestly
Mhm.
sharing my experiences of why I teach those texts. But every time for me, I feel like when I was ready, the text spoke to me. When I was ready to kind of like see the wisdom in it, it spoke to me. And maybe it even spoke to me. And then after a year, like, oh, what the hell did I see in that text that day, that evening when I was studying it, right?
Mhm.
Because and then half a year later, oh, or I teach a text with one group and everybody was like, oh my God, this is so profound. And then I bring it to another group, 2 years later in a different place, and it's like, oh, what is this text, right? So, um, it's kind of like I think it's a lot about, but I choose to listen to those teachers of previous generations, and also there's also a cumulative measure when you read more and more of those texts and you kind of understand their inner language, and you kind of become more. It's a little bit like, okay, you enroll in yoga class and you go out of everybody looks like they're doing ridiculous postures, and you go out and your body is in pain. It's like, what the hell is this thing, right? And then, but if you stay for a while, it's like, oh, this is you start to understand that there's actually a reason why we're stretching in this way or in that way, you know, and you're kind of learning the practice and you're learning how to do it. I mean, I can't. And luckily to me, I was not in the tunnels of Hamas, although I know people who did, who were and I was, and all, but I'm sure that many of us on the screen, bad things have happened to us, right? I've been in fires. I've been, people have been that I know have been afflicted by sicknesses, etc. You see what I mean? Um, and I can speak for myself. I think that learning to be more in tune with our inner self, understanding, kind of like learning and looking and observing where our thoughts come from, where our emotions come from, where our sensations come from. What is the source of our soul? Is there some relation that we can connect with the divine in good moments and in bad moments? I actually think that when you think, yes, when you think about what gives people strength to survive captivity, even, right? Um, so those are the kind of things that we can think about when we read those texts. Those texts, again, they're not meant to just be read as a intellectual exercise. I think they're trying to awaken us and push us to kind of like practice, right? Yeah, so everybody can be a judge of what these traditions do to them, and if you find it helpful, you'll probably be coming back to classes such as Rochester, right? And if not, you can open Maimonides, or you can open Shulchan Aruch, or the Talmud, or other texts. That there's so many different angles and perspectives in Judaism, and this is by no means the only one or the only way to develop, right? So we live in a plural. And again, so Jess, I'll say another sentence about it. I kind of like, and we also have to wrap it up in a second. I kind of like when I study these texts, and again, this is just me. It doesn't mean that, people who are in Temple Sinai, just because I'm the rabbi, have to follow my perspective. I'm just sharing with my perspective and what I've learned throughout the years. If I study those texts academically, I can, but without kind of like saying, oh, this is a spiritual teaching to me, for me, right? I can just appreciate the text in a certain way.
Mhm.
If I study the text and saying this is actually, a spiritual teaching that I listen to deeply, I can also gain from this thing that I couldn't if I was just studying it from a critical academic point of view. But then there'd be like the danger of me turning into like a cult, or kind of like like a kind of like being lost in the rabbit hole, right? So I try to kind of keep both. I think as a Reformed Jew who's also, has like attempts to be studying from Kabbalists, right? I kind of try to keep both perspectives and integrate them. We can learn these traditions, and we're in the 21st century. We don't have to believe every word that they say. We don't have. We can be critical, We can say this text was written by, in the Middle Ages in a certain context of history and culture. We can say this page I like, this page I don't like, just like we do with other, Jewish texts. Yet at the same time, I feel if we also agree to listen to it from a spiritual perspective, we have something to gain, because it can really help us grow. But it doesn't mean that we have to become like now groupies of the Zohar and move to Arizona and open a farm and lead a strange life, even though it could be a good idea. But see what I mean? I'm kind of like trying to balance between the rational and the more mystical or mysterious elements of these texts. All right. Anybody else before we end up, because it's like already past our bedtime? All right. So, okay. So, all the best to you all. Wish me luck at the conference tomorrow. I'll try to represent the Jews well amongst the Christians and be a good sport. And I wish you all a splendid night. Thank you for listening and for participating and for all your comments and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Have fun tomorrow.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye-bye.